Oh, there's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a Friday Reads, but I'm actually filming this Thursday night just because I checked the weather. It's supposed to rain cats and dogs all day tomorrow, so I won't be able to do it outside. I've got other stuff going on in the morning, and I'm home and on my second glass of wine, and some of you complain that I never do tipsy Friday Reads. I'm certainly not tipsy at the beginning of this video, but let's see where I end up by the end, shall we? I have had an interesting reading week. Highs and lows. And I want to tell you all about it. So, what should I start with? My bales? Yeah, I guess my bales are... At least one of them is a little controversial. I've had two. One was later last Friday after I posted the video. I bailed on the Ivy Compton Burnett novel. No! Have it. One of my subscribers said she's an acquired taste or she's not for everybody, but I really like her. That I got one of those comments. Nobody else commented, so she's a minor writer, and I think what my subscriber said is exactly right. It's not the wine talking yet. It's just Thursday night giddiness. Men and Wives by Ivy Compton Burnett. It's only a slight exaggeration to say that I couldn't make head nor tail of it. I could follow the story, but the story was like, it was like the characters were talking underwater, and you had to pay such close attention to get the nuance of what was being talked about, because nobody was talking directly, and they weren't really talking to each other. It was interesting. And when I made the time to really deeply pay attention, I could see what she was up to, and I thought it was intriguing. But it gave me a freaking headache. And I read, I think, half of it, didn't I? Yeah, I read half of it, and I just said, you know what, I don't care. It was about a domineering mother of an upper-class family and the various relationships among the neighbors. But Compton Burnett didn't make me care about any of that. So it's probably not her best. I would maybe try what other people said was her absolute best, but not for a decade or two. No, not for me. And then, perhaps quite surprising to you all, is I bailed on the Anthony Trollope, Phineas Finn. It was so boring. The protagonist was boring. It was so preoccupied with British politics late in the first half of the 19th century. And I'm interested in politics to a certain degree, but this was mind-numbingly boring, and there were no interesting characters. Trollope is good when he has lots of women in his stories, and the women here were so minor, and the only quote-unquote major character was Lady Laura, and she wasn't very interesting. And remember, those of you that did the Can You Forgive Steve Donahue read-along, where we read Can You Forgive Her? Lady Cora made that novel. And she's in this novel, but I read a third of it, and she'd only shown up for a non-speaking walk-on for 2 pages. I was so angry. Yes, I could have stayed. I could have stuck with it to see if she would have a bigger presence, but no, I was just pissed off at how boring it was. And it's apparently not his best, and they say the next one, book number 3 in the series, but no, I don't think I will continue with this series, because I've bailed on book number 2. It is a truth universally acknowledged that Victorian writers need colorful women in their stories, or else their stories are stupid, boring, and irrelevant. So, those are my bails. I finished 2. One was the Charlotte Mary Young novel, The Carbonyls, and it wasn't very good. I gave it 3 stars, which means it was a bad book. There was a lot to admire. That's a cliched reviewer's sentence, but there was a lot to admire. Young writes so well. And this was a story about the upper-class family, the Carbonyls, that they inherit a distant relative's estate, and they move into the boonies, into this estate, onto their new property. And they want to help the lower-class people that live around them. So that kind of a story is really ideologically suspect for a reader in the 21st century, and probably even by the 1930s and the 20th century. It was a charity story, and the Carbonyls, they did have personalities. They didn't jump off the page, but they at least sat up. But a Marxist literary critic would have a field day with this book. And I'm not a Marxist literary theorist by any stretch of the imagination, but by the end, I was ready to puke. Charlotte Mary Young, if those of you that don't know, she was affiliated with the Oxford movement, which was the forerunner to the Anglo-Catholic religious sect in the United Kingdom. But her best novels, and I think maybe at this point I'm only willing to say that she had one novel that I would recommend, and that's the one I read last year, The Heir of Redcliffe, where that stuff was so minimal that you wouldn't even notice it was there. And it was just a really compelling, rich, fully realized novel that is better than most of the stuff that everybody else talks about in Victober. But this one suffered, and it was much later in Young's career. She wrote hundreds of novels, and this one was way too religious. It held my interest until it started to move into the conclusion, and the conclusion was so bad that a modern reader just, you might not puke like I wanted to, but you would be unsatisfied. So that happened. 3 stars. But in much happier news, about 15 minutes ago, I finished the novel that I started way back in Women in Translation Month, Anna Seeger's The Seventh Cross, translated from the German by Margot Batower Dembo. I absolutely loved it. It's one of the best novels I've read this year. It's one of the best novels of the 20th century that nobody's ever heard of, unless you're from Germany or unless you follow NYRB Books. And NYRB Books, I have to say, publishes a lot of crap. This should be much more widely read. I'm going to do a full review. It's set in the Nazi Germany. And no, you have not read enough stories like this unless you've read this one. Because this one is the best. Freaking amazing. Stay tuned for my review. I loved it so much, and my slow reading of it over 3 months was exactly the pace at which I needed to experience this phenomenal work of literature. Whew! And I have started a few. What have I started? I've started 2. I started this novel, Despised and Rejected, by Rose Alatini. I know I wasn't supposed to start it until whatever the last 7 days of the month are, but I started it a bit early this week just because of scheduling issues between Leah and I, my buddy reader from Canada. And this is a queer novel published in 1918, and it is blowing my mind. It's about gay and lesbian characters coming out. And Maurice was written a few years before this, but not published until the 1970s. But in terms of publication history, I think this is the first work of fiction that had any kind of readership in the 20th century that explored the closet and what it was like to come out. And it's so good for that. The psychological dynamics of it is just incredible. The story itself, situating those queer characters in their straight milieu in the early, just before World War I broke out, I could take or leave all of the other fluff, but the coming out queer part of the story is absolutely incredible. So I'll have much more to say about this when I finish it next week, but I'm really, really enjoying it. And in terms of what I would like to finishing up my Victober reads and so on, I was feeling a little restless yesterday, thinking, I could probably squeeze one more little novel in that's not Victober, that's not Gone with the Book, but something, that appeals to that other half of my reading brain, something from another country, translated perhaps. So I settled on the first novel that I've read from Korea, except for that piece of crap that won some literary prize a couple years ago about eating salads or something. This is called Stingray by Kim Joo-young. It's set in a small Korean farming village in the 1950s. I'm reading it on Scribd, so you too could read it. And I don't know exactly when it was published. Kim Joo-young was born in 1939. Kim Joo-young is a man. So I'm just in the first 25 pages or so, and it's a young man. I think he's about 12 years old, living with his mother. The father has deserted them. They've had a horrendous snowstorm. The snow's come right up to the roof. And a homeless teenage girl has they find her in the kitchen. She's sought shelter in their kitchen, and the mother takes her in. That's as far as I've got, but it's really beautifully told. I love the voice. So it is translated by Louis Vinciguerra and Inre U. Vinciguerra. Look, I'm guessing a husband and wife team, and I love the prose, and I'm really enjoying the story. So I've got that on the go as well, and I should be able to finish up that. All the books I've talked about having started this week, plus Lucas Malet's The Gateless Barrier, George Gissing's The Odd Women, and the Best American Short Stories 2018 by the end of the month. All things being equal. I am not planning to start anything else until next Friday, which will be my next Friday reads. And I probably won't have started anything for my November TBR until after I do my Friday reads. But I'm going to keep you in suspense. I'm going to film a November TBR, which will include what little nonfiction reading I'm planning to do, along with a whole bunch of other buddy reads. So it's been an interesting reading week, and especially because of the Anna Sagers novel, I feel just full to the brim with literary ecstasy. This has been short, so let me see if I want to shout out any videos. What have I enjoyed recently? Greg of Supposedly Fun did the Finally Fall book tag. I tagged him a few days ago, and his take on the tag is great. I will link that. Mel of Mel's Bookland Adventures does a regular Monday check-in, and this one was especially saucy and erudite. You must check that out. Kathy of Grim Reads also did the Finally Fall book tag, which I tagged her on. Fabulous. Peg is back talking about this literary prize and that literary prize, and I loved her latest video talking about the Goldsmiths, and the National Book Awards, and the Dagger Awards, which will be announced tomorrow night. And she talked about a couple books by the same transgender writer that I had never heard of, and so do check that video out for that especially. Britta of Britta Bowler did a fabulous review of Wuthering Heights and the other Bronte sisters as a devastating rebuttal to Brian of Bookish, who didn't like Wuthering Heights. What's been going on with you reading-wise this week? Thanks for watching.